First question is, do you know what racism is? No?
The dictionary defines racism as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. We will talk to people from multiple time frames and show how racism has evolved. 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Founding of NAACP. U.S. troops invaded Mexico. Birth of a nation. KKK activity peaks. 9 blacks accused of raping a girl. Threatened march on Washington. White mobs in Detroit murder 34 blacks. Jackie Robinson enters MLB. Emmett Till, Rosa Parks, Little Rock 9. Sit-ins begin. Freedom rides begin. MLK jailed during protests, New Birth of a Nation movie. We interviewed people from many ages and races. Here they are.
We were just people. We were sailors. And that was what was important.
Racism is...
Generally, it is believing that one race is superior to another or another race is inferior to another.
Is someone who hates another race, I guess, because of their skin color, just because they're a little different. They think they're better than everybody else.
Racism to me is hatred against people who are different than you. Different colors, different sexuality, different cultures, different religion, all that.
Making decisions based upon somebody's, whether it's their skin color or orientation or whatever. Right, just making some decisions and judgments for that matter.
That it's any wrongdoing against a certain group of people by another group of people.
Okay. Racism is like somebody that just do not like you because you're from a different color, especially black, Chinese, you know.
Racism would be treating somebody differently because of their skin color.
A bunch of hatred. White people don't like the black people.
Mm-hmm.
What was the second part of the question?
What are your thoughts on it?
Racism is bad. Racism is a form of discrimination or prejudice. Prejudice is like having a feeling to prejudge somebody. Discrimination is acting on that and having discriminatory laws. So xenophobia, transphobia, misogyny, sexism, racism, all bad things.
Uncalled for belief that because their race is different from you, they're not as good as you.
Something different colored people, which is too bad because they're all God's children.
Have people ever treated you differently from the other kids that have lighter skin than you?
No.
Did I ever say anything?
I've had people tell me, is my skin brown? Because I spilled chocolate milk on it.
Like, oh, what's wrong with your skin? Like, why don't you go wash that off?
There was an incident where, you know, somebody will come and touch your skin. Did you take a shower? And
I've been called a dirty Mexican, or just things like that.
You're okay.
I was in elementary school, and I was at the Turner pool, and I was like swimming, and then this little boy was like, oh, let's race, and I was like, okay, and then I beat him, and then he was white, and then he got mad, and he's like, oh, well, the only reason you won was because you're a wetback, and I was like, what? And then he spit in my face.
I always thought that, like, some of my cousins weren't allowed to play with me and my siblings because they thought that we were, like, they call us, like dirty kids. Like, oh, I can't play with you. My mom said you guys are dirty. My first experience with racism was probably in grade school when, like, kids would, like, call me and my brother and my sister, they called us, like, niggers, and we didn't know what that meant. And so like we would go home and he would ask my mom, what does that mean? Or like, why are they calling me that? Like, why aren't, like, are you one? And with my dad are probably the first experiences. Like, people giving double looks, or like walking down the street with him and then people moving like to the other side. Or like walking down the mall and then people like grab their kids.
Like, one time I was checking the mail. I had a big tattoo on the side of myself, so I had a cut-off shirt on, and I went, this lady drove up with her kid to the mailbox. I went right behind them. And I probably looked kind of like thuggish or whatever. And anyways, she had like her 10-year-old kid in the car. And I remember this really bothered me because I got out of my car, and then she opened her door. She was parked in front of me. She opened her door, and as she opened it, you know, she looked back and she saw me, and she like looked like scared. And she like closed the door, and then I'm like, okay, that's really weird. And she like sat in her car, and I walked next to her car to like go to the mail, and then all of a sudden her kid like jumped in the front seat, and then he like locked the door right there, and then she locked. I could hear her push the button, and she locked all the doors.
So my mom is from a different country. She's from Chile, and she came to the United States when she was 20. She has a very strong accent, and it's really sometimes hard to understand her. But people, I've witnessed people think that she's less educated because she has an accent. And so as a child, I always saw people treat her differently. But she's a very educated woman. She has her bachelor's, she has her master's. She's a very strong woman. But that's one of the things I really impacted me as a child, seeing people treat my mom differently just because of who she is as a, from her culture and for her, the way she talks.
We like you brothers playing basketball, but we don't like you hanging out with our women. Having your dreads, they call you a mop head. You know, oh, that ganja smoker. You know, why'd you go back to Africa? You know where the airport is. You know, all those sort of things. But we just kind of, because we're told to be wise. You know, anytime those situation comes, you know, you just don't let it ruin your day and your moment. And just kind of, anytime you get an opportunity, try to educate them and lead by example to show them that we're all one people.
We were at some restaurant, and an African American family walked in, and she goes, oh, "Look at the colors." And I just remember going, "Grandma, shut up! What are you talking about?" But that was a different generation.
See, I never saw my first black person until I was in high school.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and so that was introduced to a bunch of people, and one of them happened to be black, and I'm going, okay, another kid, you know, so I was not brought up with any prejudices. So I did not form any, unless I formed any on my own, and it was like a jerk is a jerk no matter what color they are, you know.
You might be between a Filipino or a black American or an American Indian. We had no race.
It's just a culture shock, I guess. And I think the area that we live in isn't really helpful with it, especially when I'm the only black kid in life. It's definitely harder to deal with, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, and that's where ignorance comes from. That's where racism comes from.
I live a pretty sheltered life as far as races and stuff like that. I mean, you look at our population here at this school, I would not say we're very diverse. I don't see a lot of it here. In my educational career, 28 years, I personally do not see a lot of that. I know I've had kids come to me and say, hey, so-and-so said this about me, and so we deal with it from that end. I'm not sure that we hear a lot about the stuff that actually goes on, and I mean, the part of it, we don't know what's going on unless we know what's going on kind of thing. And I would hope that most people feel like that we deal with it pretty aggressively, that we don't have any tolerance for that kind of stuff.
Not to bash on Cascade, but I've been here 23 years, and at Cascade we've had KKK scrawled on like a mirror. And my first year here, I was walking through the parking lot, and some kid yelled to another kid, they were playing music, and he said, "Hey, turn that nigger," and stuff like that. And so that's stuff I've heard, and when I talk to students.
It's gotten worse, like, because, I don't know, we're just getting older and they understand it more?
I think better systemically, but I think there's obviously still like hidden racism that a lot of people don't want to talk about or admit that it's racism. So
No, I want to say better for humankind. I think it's gotten better, maybe because it's not so hidden.
For the better. Open racism is much more looked down upon. It's much less socially acceptable. We have laws, like hate crime laws, that I really like and I really support. So when somebody does something and it's based upon hatred, then there's an enhancement to that. So that's a good thing. Clearly, the election of Barack Obama was a major thing, and there were so many idiots out there like, oh, racism in America is over now, and that is clearly untrue, especially with the election of Trump, who openly, like KKK and neo-Nazis, are openly saying and have been saying, we finally have a president who will fight for us.
To me, the biggest thing that changed is the social media part of it, where people now have a platform, for the worse in most cases, where they can just spew their thoughts out there without repercussions or whatever. I think that's the hard part. I think that's probably gotten worse. Do I think racism has gotten better or worse? I don't know that I'm the person who can really judge that. I feel like it's more prominent just because people put it out there, but I mean, I would hope each generation cares less about the skin color and more about the person, because there are really good people.
It's gotten a lot better throughout my life. Back in the 60s, there was race riots going on and stuff on the East Coast in just about every city. I mean, they were burning buildings down, busting out store windows.
Well, it's worse than it was when I was. People were outspoken.
My grandparents came over, and how my dad came over. I don't like how I feel about it is like, I think anyone should be able to come over. Like, I don't think that people should be put over there just because of their skin color or just because of like the way they look or stuff like that.
Yeah. Because, yeah, it has, because if it affects me, because if my family were to never come here illegally, I wouldn't be here. So yeah, my family came here illegally. My dad was 6 when he came here, and then he was deported 10 years ago.
So my dad came here illegally. So I think if you talk about it in that sense, like my story, I wouldn't be here without my dad coming here illegally. But he's legal now. But I mean, I think it's dangerous. It's always dangerous to judge a group of people, or to judge, in this topic, it's generally Hispanics or Mexicans, to judge them all equally and say all these immigrants, are not good, etc., etc. Because my dad works hard, he pays taxes.
Do you think that the color of your skin makes you different from any of the other kids at school?
A little.
A little? Why?
Because I have a friend, his name is Cooper, and he's a little lighter than me.
I mean, sometimes it really, it's just sometimes I do, just because of like the way they say things to me.
People aren't born racist. They're not born racist. They're taught to be racist, and they're, kind of not like adapted. Like they're like steered in that way, and they're like, this is the right way. No, you're superior because you're white. No, that kid is lesser than you. You're better than that kid because,
They see black people, in this community, the way they dress, automatically trouble, criminal, all these labels just thrown out, and they accept it, even if they have no criminal background, And so you run into a situation where you get uncomfortable being in certain places because everybody wear a tie and suit and you're talking to each other and you just kind of don't fit in there. You're just not comfortable. And it could be a store, it could be a bar, it could be any, So, yeah, it's just, you feel this resistance, you feel this uncomfortable in this area. And that's why you find some of the brothers, it's they're 1 or 2 or 3 together, at least you can talk to each other, just to make the environment comfortable.
I learned that people won't typically normally admit that they're racist, and like Raya talked about, nobody's born racist, and I think that we should try to be more like the kids and just try not to see the color because it really doesn't matter. And I think talking to the older people, just the fact that they had to break free from what they were taught. Like, most of them told us that they weren't racist and, like, everybody's seen as the same and, like, made in God's image and stuff like that. Which, like, that depends on how you view religion and things like that. But I thought that was really powerful. And just, like, talking to Raya's dad, too, about, like, how much it does affect you, just hearing stuff all the time. And, like, simply someone moving out of the way of you when you're on the sidewalk, like, that would offend anyone. And I just think that's not right.
I think that part of what I learned is how, like, I don't know, like, when, like, talking to, like, my dad and stuff, how he sees it as not a big deal, and how he's kind of, like, numb to the racistness, is that a thing?
Racism?
How he's kind of numb to it, because he's like, oh yeah, this happens all the time, this is just, like, normal, like, this is my everyday, what happens to me every day, these are what people say to me every single day, and, like, all these microaggressions that happen, I think that, I don't know, microaggressions are like killing someone with paper cuts. You know what I mean? It's like not, but then you just don't notice it. And I think that's not okay.
So I've like learned that how much racism has changed between the elderly and the younger. Like with the elderly, there's a lot more cases of racism. Back then, like that's how they kind of grew up. And like the younger generation is just kind of slowing down, but there's still parts of racism.
Yeah. And social media, definitely. Mr. Ganfield talked about that social media, it's a lot easier to post and not actually say it to the person's face. And I think that the N-word is thrown around a lot, and specifically at our school even. I think that people just don't take it as seriously as the word should be taken because it is very offensive. And
alright, let's get it.